The coffee was still warm when Emily Carter disappeared. It was a Thursday night at Henderson County Hospital in Maple Creek, Alabama. The halls were quiet, the fluorescent lights humming above the empty reception desk. Emily, a 26-year-old nurse, clocked out after her late shift. The digital time card printed 11:47 p.m. She carried her brown tote over one shoulder and balanced a paper cup of coffee in her hand. Security footage captured her moving through the side corridor, calm, unhurried, unaware that it would be the last recording of her alive. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty. A few cars remained under the yellow glow of the overhead lamps. Emily walked toward her red 1993 Toyota Camry, parked near the back fence. She unlocked the door, placed her tote on the passenger seat and started the engine. She called her younger sister, Lydia, to say she was on her way home. Lydia later remembered the short call lasting less than a minute. Emily sounded tired but normal. At midnight, the hospital janitor noticed a vehicle idling in the far corner of the lot, a dark pickup truck with its headlights off. He thought little of it and continued sweeping the walkway. By sunrise, Emily had not come home. Her bed was untouched. Lydia called the hospital, then the sheriff's office. Friends began phoning around, checking emergency rooms and roadside assistance lines. There were no accidents reported, no hospital admissions, and no calls from Emily's number. At 8:15 a.m., a farmer driving along County Road 12 noticed a red car parked awkwardly on the shoulder. The driver's door was open. The keys dangled from the ignition. A half-full coffee cup sat in the holder, and Emily's hospital ID badge rested on the seat. The farmer contacted the police immediately. Sheriff deputies arrived within minutes. They taped off the area, took photographs, and dusted the vehicle for prints. There were no signs of a struggle inside the car, no forced entry and no blood. Emily's purse was gone. Her phone was missing. Only her keys, her badge, and that single cooling cup of coffee remained. Investigators searched the roadside ditch and nearby brush. The ground was soft from rain earlier that week. A faint trail of tire impressions ran across the gravel shoulder, veering off toward the woods. One deputy found a silver earring lodged in the dirt beside the tracks. Lydia confirmed later that Emily had worn that pair to work the night before. As daylight spread across Maple Creek, the town woke to the news. Radio stations mentioned a missing hospital nurse. Volunteers began gathering at the community center, forming search teams before noon. Detective Samuel Green, a 17-year veteran of the county department, took the lead. He examined the vehicle again. The driver's seat was pushed slightly back, unusual for Emily's small frame. The fuel tank was half full. Her watch was missing. Green ordered the Camry to be towed to the forensic bay for further testing. By afternoon, search dogs from neighboring counties had arrived. They picked up Emily's scent from the car door and followed it into the wooded stretch north of the road. The dogs stopped abruptly near a shallow creek, circling confused as if the trail ended there. Officers expanded the grid search deeper into the forest, marking trees with orange tape and collecting soil samples. Reporters arrived before evening. They filmed the scene from behind police tape, describing a quiet Alabama town shaken by a sudden disappearance. Sheriff announcements urged calm and requested information from anyone who had seen a dark-colored pickup truck near the hospital after 11 p.m. As the first night fell, spotlights illuminated the woods. Dozens of volunteers searched the creekside until midnight. The temperature dropped, and heavy mist rolled through the fields. Still, there was no trace of Emily Carter. Detective Green stood near the abandoned car, taking notes under the harsh white beam of a flashlight. He studied the faint tire marks disappearing into the tree line. Something about their depth and direction told him the vehicle that made them had left in haste. At 2 a.m., he ordered the team to suspend the search until daylight. Deputies packed up their equipment, and volunteers returned home. The road fell silent again. The red Camry, once part of an ordinary night, now stood as the first piece of a mystery that would haunt Maple Creek for decades. The investigation was only beginning, but one detail refused to fade. That single earring glinting in the dirt, and the narrow path of tire marks leading deep into the woods. Emily Carter was 26 years old when she vanished. She was born and raised in Maple Creek, a small Alabama town where people still left their doors unlocked and waved to neighbors from porches. After graduating high school, she trained as a nurse at Henderson County Hospital, where she quickly earned a reputation for calm efficiency and quiet kindness. Patients remembered her steady voice, her neat handwriting on medication charts, and the way she stayed past her shift when someone was scared or alone. Emily lived with her younger sister, Lydia, in a small two-bedroom house near the edge of town. Their parents had passed away years earlier, and the sisters had built a quiet life together. Emily worked long hours and spent weekends volunteering at the local church clinic. Lydia often said Emily was the kind of person who tried to fix everything, machines, people, and sometimes hearts. But beneath that calm surface, Emily's life carried traces of strain. She had recently ended a 4-year relationship with Mark Ellison, a local mechanic. Friends said the breakup was difficult but necessary. Emily had described him as controlling, sometimes jealous, though never violent. She told co-workers she needed space to rebuild her independence. In the weeks before her disappearance, Emily had seemed both tired and relieved. She often stayed later at work, filling overtime shifts. She stopped going out on weekends, choosing quiet evenings at home. Lydia later told investigators that Emily had mentioned someone stopping by the house unexpectedly, a man offering to repair their old dryer. She said it felt uncomfortable, but brushed it off as routine service work. At the hospital, no one noticed signs of fear or distress. Emily's supervisor said she was focused, punctual, and organized. Her co-workers described her as the kind of person who avoided gossip and rarely spoke about her personal life. She was careful with her belongings, always locking her car, always following the same route home. Those who knew her could not imagine her vanishing by choice. Her bank account remained untouched. Her phone records showed no late-night calls or unusual activity. There were no secrets, no debts, and no indication that she planned to leave town. For investigators, Emily's life appeared steady and predictable, which made her disappearance even more alarming. People like her did not simply disappear from small towns like Maple Creek. The first missing person flyer carried her photograph, a young woman with soft brown hair, a pale uniform, and a calm expression that seemed almost unshakable. The image was posted on gas station doors, community boards, and grocery store windows across Henderson County. By the end of that first day, residents who had once passed her in hospital corridors or seen her at the pharmacy now spoke her name with disbelief. A nurse who always cared for others had become the subject of a desperate search. Late that night, as investigators reviewed Emily's hospital footage once more, a witness came forward claiming they had seen a dark pickup truck waiting near the lot, the same vehicle that would soon draw their full attention. At 11:47 p.m., Emily Carter clocked out from Henderson County Hospital for the last time. The shift had been long but uneventful. She said goodbye to the night receptionist, stepped into the cool air, and crossed the quiet lot toward her red Toyota Camry. Surveillance footage caught her moving steadily, brown tote on her shoulder, a faint smile visible as she balanced her coffee cup in one hand. That footage ended abruptly at the corner of the lot, just before she reached her car. At 11:55 p.m., Emily called her sister, Lydia. The call lasted 53 seconds. She said she was leaving work and would be home in 15 minutes. Her voice sounded tired but steady. That was the last confirmed contact. Minutes later, a janitor making rounds near the east exit noticed headlights flicker from the far end of the parking area. A dark pickup truck sat near the back fence, engine running, lights dimmed. The janitor assumed it belonged to a security guard and kept moving. He would later tell police that the truck rolled slowly toward the hospital exit around midnight. At 12:10 a.m., a nurse leaving late saw Emily's car still parked in its usual spot. Nothing appeared unusual. But by 12:30 a.m., both vehicles, Emily's Camry and the unknown truck, were gone. When Lydia woke at 2 a.m. and realized her sister was not home, she called Emily's phone. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. She left a message, then another an hour later. By morning, she contacted the sheriff's office to report her missing. Deputies began their search by retracing Emily's usual route home, a narrow 2-lane road bordered by woods and farmland. Less than 2 miles from the hospital, they found her car parked awkwardly on the shoulder. The driver's door hung open. The keys were still in the ignition. The seat was adjusted farther back than Emily would have placed it. Her coffee cup sat untouched, the liquid inside cold. The area around the vehicle showed faint tire marks leading off into the trees. The soft earth carried impressions of boot prints, blurred by early morning dew. Deputies photographed everything. They collected fibers from the seat and dusted the door handles for prints. Inside the car, there were no signs of struggle. Emily's hospital ID badge lay on the passenger seat beside her tote bag. Her purse and phone were missing. Detectives noted that the car's engine was cold, meaning it had been left there for several hours. Detective Samuel Green arrived at the scene shortly after 9 a.m. He ordered the road closed for evidence processing. Using a flashlight, he examined the tire tracks disappearing into the wooded ditch. They belonged to a larger vehicle, possibly a pickup truck. He then noticed something metallic glinting beside the gravel. It was a small silver earring, partially buried in the mud. Later, Lydia would confirm it was part of the pair Emily had worn that night. By midday, a full search operation was underway. Officers, firefighters, and volunteers combed through the dense woods and creek beds. K9 units followed Emily's scent for nearly half a mile before losing it near a bend in the river. Helicopters scanned the area from above, but thick tree cover made visibility poor. As the day stretched on, media crews arrived. The story of the missing nurse spread across Alabama within hours. Reporters described a dedicated hospital worker who had vanished without a trace. Detective Green coordinated interviews with hospital staff. Most had left before midnight, but one night Orderly remembered hearing what he described as a short, sharp cry from outside near the east lot, sometime after midnight. He dismissed it at the time, thinking it was a fox or stray animal. Now that sound became a crucial piece of the timeline. Police continued to search through the night, marking every clearing and creek with orange tape. They found fragments of torn fabric near the riverbank, light blue, consistent with Emily's hospital uniform. The samples were sent to the state crime lab for analysis. The following morning, the sheriff held a press conference. He urged anyone who had driven past County Road 12 between midnight and 1 a.m. to come forward. Tips began pouring in. Sightings of unfamiliar vehicles, headlights near the woods, a dark truck parked by the bridge. None could yet be confirmed. Detective Green reviewed the evidence again that night. The tire marks, the earring, the missing purse, all signs of a sudden, calculated abduction. He wrote in his report that whoever took Emily knew her route and timing. It was not random. Meanwhile, Lydia waited at home, answering calls from detectives and relatives, watching as news crews camped near the driveway. The image of her sister on missing posters stared back from every convenience store door. For 3 days, search teams worked the creeks and woods without rest. On the 4th morning, as fog rolled over the Blackwater River, a fisherman radioed authorities about something caught along the bank, something wrapped in fabric, drifting near the reeds. When officers reached the river's edge, what they found would confirm the town's worst fears and mark the beginning of a homicide investigation. The call came in at 6:42 a.m. A fisherman on the Blackwater River had found what he thought was a bundle of cloth tangled in reeds. When deputies arrived, the mist still hovered above the surface, the air thick and silent. The object floated near the shallow bend of the river, half submerged, half exposed. As officers pulled it closer, the pale edge of fabric gave way to human skin. It was Emily Carter. She was wrapped in a torn white bedsheet, tied loosely at the ankles and shoulders. The current had carried her downstream nearly 6 miles from where her car had been found. Her watch was missing. One shoe remained on. The other had vanished. The condition of her body suggested she had been in the water for more than 2 days. Detective Samuel Green arrived soon after the coroner. He stood on the muddy riverbank as forensic technicians worked in silence. A section of the sheet bore a faded laundry tag, Maple Creek Motel. Green took note of it immediately. The discovery connected Emily's death to a specific location less than a mile from the hospital. The scene was photographed from every angle. Mud samples, plant debris, and fibers from the sheet were carefully bagged. Officers extended the perimeter, searching along the water's edge for discarded items. Less than 20 feet away, they found a broken necklace chain and a hospital keycard clip. The body was transported to the county morgue under full escort. That afternoon, the coroner confirmed the cause of death: manual strangulation. There were bruises along Emily's neck, defensive wounds on her forearms, and faint traces of rope burn on her wrists. There was no evidence of drowning. She had been killed before entering the river. Forensic specialists collected samples from beneath her fingernails and sent them for analysis. In 1995, DNA testing was still in its early stages. Results would take weeks and accuracy was limited. Green knew that whatever evidence remained on the body might hold the only chance of identifying her killer. By evening, news of the discovery spread through Maple Creek. Crowds gathered near the police barricades, whispering, crying, refusing to believe. Emily Carter's photograph, once pinned to missing person boards, was now part of a homicide case. Detective Nora Phillips, newly assigned from the state task force, joined Green on site that night. Together they visited the Maple Creek Motel. The manager allowed them access to the laundry room. Several sets of identical sheets were stacked in bins marked for replacement. The faded tags matched the one recovered from the river. When questioned, staff members recalled a man who had once performed maintenance work at the motel, a local handyman named Raymond Dillard. He had not been seen in several months. He left town quietly after finishing a series of plumbing repairs that spring. Detectives took note of his name, but could not connect him directly to Emily. The motel records showed no sign-ins, no link between Dillard and the victim. Back at the lab, fibers found under Emily's nails were placed under microscopic comparison. The texture appeared synthetic, consistent with vehicle upholstery. Further analysis revealed a unique cross-stitch pattern used in a limited number of truck interiors. That discovery turned attention to vehicles matching those specifications, and to one man who happened to drive one, Mark Ellison, Emily's former boyfriend. As the case transitioned from a missing person search to a full murder investigation, the evidence pointed toward a narrow path, one leading from the hospital parking lot, through the motel, to a truck seat no one yet knew how to explain. When detectives opened Ellison's garage the next morning, they found that his truck matched the exact pattern, but the tests ahead would reveal something no one expected. When detectives arrived at Mark Ellison's property the following morning, he was already outside, leaning against his pickup truck. He appeared calm, even helpful, but there was a nervous edge in his voice that did not go unnoticed. Mark was 28 years old, a local mechanic who had dated Emily Carter for nearly 4 years. Their breakup, only a month before her disappearance, had been known around town. Friends described heated arguments, sudden reconciliations, and emotional strain that left both exhausted. Now, as Emily's murder became headline news, every eye in Maple Creek turned toward him. Detective Samuel Green asked permission to search the truck. Mark agreed without hesitation. The vehicle was a dark blue 1992 Chevy, its interior worn and stained from years of use. Forensic officers collected fiber samples from the seats, door panels, and floor mats. They compared them to the synthetic strands recovered from beneath Emily's fingernails. The match was immediate in texture and weave. But when tested further, the microscopic dye patterns did not align perfectly. The fibers were similar, possibly identical in model type, but not conclusively from Mark's vehicle. It was enough to raise suspicion, but not enough to arrest. Mark told investigators that he had been near the hospital that night. He said he drove there to talk to Emily, hoping they could reconcile. He claimed he waited in the parking lot for over an hour, but left when she did not appear. When asked why his truck was seen with its lights off near the east lot, he said he was embarrassed to be there, watching her leave work. The confession of presence without proof of crime created a difficult balance. Green saw motive and opportunity. Phillips saw an absence of physical evidence. The tension between them grew as they re-examined every piece of data. Neighbors described Mark as quiet but temperamental, the kind of man who worked long hours and preferred to keep to himself. One neighbor mentioned hearing loud arguments between him and Emily weeks before her disappearance. Another recalled seeing his truck parked near her street late at night. Still, when detectives searched his home, they found nothing connecting him to the crime. No blood traces. No fibers from Emily's clothing. No sheets matching the one from the river. His alibi, that he returned to his garage and worked on a customer's vehicle, was partially confirmed by his co-worker, who remembered him arriving around midnight. The polygraph test produced inconclusive results. His answers were hesitant, his stress levels fluctuating. But without forensic proof, the district attorney refused to move forward with charges. Media coverage intensified. Headlines painted Mark Ellison as the likely killer, the jealous ex-boyfriend. Television crews parked outside his small home, capturing footage of him entering and leaving the garage. The public began to assume guilt long before the investigation had reached a conclusion. Emily's family issued a brief statement, urging the community not to rush to judgment. Lydia refused to speak Mark's name in interviews, but she did not accuse him either. Her silence only deepened the mystery. Detective Green grew convinced the answers lay in that truck. He ordered another round of testing, hoping to find traces of Emily's DNA on the seat covers or steering wheel. Every test came back negative. The truck, though suspicious, remained clean. After 2 weeks of scrutiny, the department had exhausted every lead on Mark Ellison. Without evidence, they had no choice but to release him from suspicion, at least publicly. Green disagreed, keeping the name circled in red in his private notes. The case, now tangled between perception and proof, stood at a crossroads. The town wanted justice, the detectives wanted clarity, and the truth, buried somewhere between fibers and fear, remained hidden. Then a new witness stepped forward, a motel clerk who remembered seeing a man near the river that night, one who did not match Mark Ellison's description. In the weeks following Emily Carter's death, Maple Creek felt suspended between fear and suspicion. Every conversation in diners, schools, and churches circled back to the same question. Who killed her? The investigation pressed forward, but the answers remained just beyond reach. Detective Samuel Green and Detective Nora Phillips expanded their scope beyond Mark Ellison. They traced the motel bedsheet back to the Maple Creek Motel, verifying every employee and maintenance contractor who had worked there in 1995. The name Raymond Dillard surfaced again, listed as a handyman who had left town just months before Emily's murder. He had no known address, no forwarding information, and a reputation for drifting from job to job. Detectives contacted nearby counties, asking for employment or arrest records. There were none. Dillard had vanished from paper and memory. Without an address or witness placing him near Emily, his name stayed buried in the growing list of persons of interest. Meanwhile, investigators revisited the evidence from the riverbank. The soil analysis showed traces of motor oil residue, suggesting that Emily's body had been transported in a vehicle used for manual labor, possibly a truck bed. This finding reignited Green's fixation on Mark Ellison's Chevy. He requested additional forensic testing on the upholstery, the tires, even the toolboxes inside the garage. Again, nothing tied Ellison to the crime scene. Phillips urged a wider approach. She began interviewing hospital staff, delivery drivers, and anyone who worked night shifts in the surrounding area. Some mentioned a dark truck parked behind the hospital on multiple nights before Emily's disappearance. Others spoke of a stranger, a man asking about nurse schedules, claiming to be looking for a lost dog. Descriptions varied, but none matched Ellison exactly. As days passed without an arrest, rumors filled the silence. Locals whispered that Emily had been secretly seeing someone new, that she had planned to move to Birmingham, or that she had been stalked by a patient from the hospital. Each theory spread faster than the last, distorting fact into speculation. Talk radio programs debated her case, calling it the nurse by the river. Journalists arrived from Montgomery and Mobile, chasing leads that led nowhere. Every false headline deepened the wound in Maple Creek, turning private grief into public spectacle. Within the police department, frustration built. The fiber evidence from Emily's nails matched a specific category of truck interiors, but not one unique to a single owner. Hundreds of similar vehicles operated across Alabama. Without DNA confirmation, the connection was circumstantial at best. Detective Phillips began focusing on behavioral patterns instead of physical evidence. She studied the timeline, the abduction near midnight, the controlled disposal of the body, the familiarity with local roads. Whoever did this knew the area well. The precision suggested planning, not impulse. In her report, Phillips wrote that the killer likely lived or worked within a 5-mile radius of the hospital and understood the terrain surrounding the Blackwater River. It was a small detail, but it narrowed their search. At home, Lydia Carter withdrew from the public eye. She refused interviews and stopped attending church. Only close friends visited, bringing food and quiet company. Her silence was misinterpreted by the press as secrecy, feeding another cycle of rumors. Detectives kept working through every possible lead, chasing phone tips and reviewing highway cameras that offered only static grain. Weeks became months. Evidence was processed, reprocessed, and filed away in folders labeled pending. Then, in late November, a motel clerk contacted the sheriff's office. She said she recognized the face on the news, the photograph of Emily Carter. On the night Emily disappeared, the clerk remembered seeing a man standing near the river bridge close to midnight. He wore a maintenance jacket with the Maple Creek Motel logo. The description did not match Mark Ellison. The motel clerk's statement reignited hope inside the investigation, but it did not last long. Her description, a tall man in a dark jacket carrying what looked like a tool bag, matched dozens of laborers in the area. When detectives showed her a lineup of possible suspects, she hesitated, unable to make a positive identification. Detectives Samuel Green and Nora Phillips followed the trail anyway. They began reviewing work records from the Maple Creek Motel and nearby businesses, searching for anyone who had left town abruptly after October 1995. The name Raymond Dillard appeared again, but there was no address, no family contact, and no arrest record. It was as if he had vanished. For weeks, the case moved in circles. Tips poured in from across Alabama. Sightings of strange vehicles, rumors of confessions, anonymous calls claiming to know who did it. Each one sent investigators to small towns, abandoned barns, and empty fields. None brought them closer to Emily Carter's killer. By December, the case file filled several drawers inside the county sheriff's office. Hundreds of pages detailed interviews, lab results, and field notes that led nowhere. The media's attention faded, and so did the community's patience. People began to believe the truth would never come. Forensics from the crime lab returned without breakthroughs. The fiber evidence remained inconclusive. No fingerprints on the car matched any known suspect. The DNA samples taken from Emily's nails were too degraded for analysis by 1995 standards. Each test ended with the same phrase, insufficient for comparison. Detective Green grew restless. He revisited the evidence night after night, convinced that something had been overlooked. Phillips, more methodical, urged restraint. She wanted to preserve every item, in the hope that future technology might reveal what the present could not. Together, they argued quietly in the narrow office they shared, surrounded by photographs of Emily's car, the riverbank, and that single earring still sealed in plastic. The department's budget tightened. Search teams disbanded. Volunteers stopped calling. The last organized sweep of the Blackwater River area yielded nothing new. Even the FBI consultation, requested by Phillips, concluded with no viable suspect. By early 1997, the Carter file was officially labeled a cold case. Boxes of evidence were stored in the county archive, numbered and shelved beside dozens of other unsolved crimes. For Maple Creek, the silence that followed was heavy. The murder of a young nurse had shaken their sense of safety, but with time, fear turned to resignation. Life resumed its routines. Detective Green retired the following year, unable to let go. Before leaving, he requested permission to make a full copy of the Carter case file for personal reference. It was an unusual request, but the department approved it. Hidden among those documents, Green kept one sealed envelope, a fingernail sample that had never been sent to the lab, preserved in its original container. He stored it in a climate-controlled box at home just in case. Detective Phillips transferred to Birmingham to work in the Violent Crimes Division. She carried the weight of Emily Carter's case with her, often wondering if she had missed something crucial in those first weeks. Years began to slip by. Evidence sat untouched, locked away in darkness. The Carter case became another unsolved entry in the long ledger of forgotten crimes. More than 2 decades later, a single initiative to reopen old files would bring that envelope, and the truth it contained, back into the light. Time moved forward, but the memory of Emily Carter never left Maple Creek completely. For months after the investigation closed, her face still appeared in shop windows and on bulletin boards, the edges of each poster fading beneath the sun. Then slowly they disappeared, taken down one by one until there were none left. Detective Samuel Green retired to his small farmhouse outside town. His once busy days were replaced by long evenings with the old case files spread across his kitchen table. He would reread every report, every witness statement and study the crime scene photographs under a desk lamp. He could not let go of the feeling that something critical had been missed, a thread buried in plain sight. In a small wooden box on a shelf, he kept the untested sample from beneath Emily's fingernails. He sealed it carefully, labeling it with a single word: evidence. Detective Nora Phillips continued her career in Birmingham. She worked robbery, homicide, and missing persons, but the Carter case followed her through every transfer. Whenever a new forensic technique was introduced, she would quietly wonder if it could finally identify the skin cells preserved from that night. But technology in the early 2000s still lacked the precision needed to extract a viable profile from degraded material. Lydia Carter built a quieter life of her own. She married a teacher from Montgomery, moved away and changed her last name. Though she rarely spoke publicly about her sister, she maintained contact with Detective Phillips, checking in once a year to ask if there had been any new progress. The answer was always the same: nothing yet. In Maple Creek, time eroded the sharp edges of grief. The hospital replaced its old security cameras, the motel changed ownership, and the road where Emily's car had been found was widened and repaved. For newcomers, the story of the murdered nurse was a distant rumor, but for those who had lived through it, the silence around her case became part of the town's identity. Detective Green passed away in 2015. When his belongings were catalogued, his family found boxes of case notes stacked in his basement. Among them was the sealed envelope marked evidence. The sample remained intact, stored at room temperature, its potential forgotten but not destroyed. His family turned over the materials to the Henderson County Sheriff's Office, where they were placed into storage once again. 4 years later, in 2019, the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation launched a new forensic initiative to re-examine unsolved cases from the 1980s and 1990s. The program focused on old evidence that had been preserved but never tested with modern techniques. Detective Nora Phillips, now leading the state's cold case task force, was assigned to oversee the project for the southern region. When the Carter file appeared on her list, she paused. The name alone carried a lifetime of unfinished work. She traveled back to Maple Creek to review the evidence personally. Inside the storage room, stacked among faded boxes and dust-covered folders, she found Green's old envelope. The label was dated November 1996. Inside was the preserved nail sample from Emily. Carter's autopsy, the last physical trace of the killer's contact. Phillips ordered the sample, sent to the State Forensic Lab in Montgomery. It was part of a batch of 50 cold cases prioritized for new DNA extraction methods using advanced microcell analysis. These new systems could separate and identify genetic material from as few as 10 skin cells, something impossible in 1995. Weeks passed without news. Phillips kept working through other files, but her thoughts returned constantly to Maple Creek. In late summer 2019, an email arrived from the state lab. The subject line was short: Carter sample, viable DNA profile generated. The message confirmed that the skin cell sample contained a complete male DNA sequence. It was uploaded to CODIS, the National Forensic Database, for automatic comparison. 2 weeks later, the match came back. The system linked the profile to a man arrested in Georgia the previous year for assault, Raymond Dillard, age 54. His record included minor offenses: trespassing, theft, and public disturbance. But deeper searches confirmed that in 1995, Dillard had worked at the Maple Creek Motel as a maintenance worker. He had left town just days after Emily Carter's murder. The name that had appeared in old reports, dismissed for lack of evidence, was suddenly alive again, and now backed by science. Detective Phillips drove to Montgomery to verify the results herself. She read the match report 3 times before speaking. The sample that Green had preserved nearly 24 years earlier had finally given Emily Carter a voice. Phillips closed the file, her hands steady. The system had provided the name, but finding Raymond Dillard and proving what he had done that night would be far more difficult. The confirmation of the DNA match sent a ripple through the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation. After 24 years of silence, Emily Carter's case was active again. For Detective Nora Phillips, it was more than another file reopened. It was the unfinished story that had haunted her since 1995. The laboratory report was precise. The male DNA extracted from the debris beneath Emily's fingernails was a full match to Raymond Dillard. Born in 1965, originally from Mississippi, with a scattered history of blue-collar jobs across Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. His record showed no violent felonies, but there were several charges for trespassing, petty theft, and substance abuse. He had lived an unstable life, drifting between temporary employment and motels, a pattern that had allowed him to disappear for decades. Phillips began reconstructing his movements. Using employment and utility records, she traced Dillard's timeline from 1993 through 1996. He had worked as a handyman at the Maple Creek Motel until November 1995, the same month Emily was murdered. Witness statements from that period, long archived, confirmed that a Ray D had been seen near the river bridge late at night, repairing floodlights. No one had verified that detail at the time, and the lead had faded into the background noise of rumor and speculation. Now, it was the center of the investigation. Phillips ordered surveillance teams to locate Dillard. Current records placed him in Augusta, Georgia, where he worked for a small construction company under his real name. He lived alone in a rented trailer on the outskirts of the city. Within days, agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation joined the operation. They began quiet observation, documenting his habits, movements, and contacts. Dillard was a man shaped by years of transience. He avoided social interaction, paid in cash, and used no social media. His life appeared empty. No spouse, no children, no close friends. Yet when agents examined his employment history, a disturbing pattern emerged. In multiple towns across 3 states, there had been reports of women being followed, watched, or harassed by someone matching his description. None of those cases had resulted in charges. Phillips reviewed every report personally. She could see the same behaviors repeating: short-term employment, quick exits after incidents, a careful avoidance of law enforcement. Dillard had moved through small communities unnoticed, leaving only fragments of suspicion behind. To build a case strong enough for an arrest, Phillips needed more than the DNA link. The sample tied him to Emily Carter, but prosecutors would require context, opportunity, motive, and supporting evidence. She reached out to the Henderson County Sheriff's Office and requested that all physical materials from the original investigation be reopened for forensic re-examination. Inside the old evidence boxes, technicians found several items that had never been fully analyzed: a broken button recovered from Emily's car, the motel bedsheet fragment, and soil samples from the riverbank. Modern testing revealed trace fibers, consistent with the industrial uniforms used by maintenance workers at the Maple Creek Motel in 1995. The brand and pattern matched the same clothing Dillard had been issued during his employment. Each result added another piece to the puzzle. The timeline, once clouded, was becoming clear. Dillard had finished his evening shift around 11 p.m. on October 12, 1995. His assigned vehicle, a dark pickup truck with the motel logo, was logged as missing from the lot that night and returned early. The next morning, with 27 additional miles on the odometer, the report, handwritten by the motel manager, had never been forwarded to investigators at the time. Phillips now had what Green and the original team never did: science, technology, and the missing link between Dillard's job and Emily Carter's last known moments. By late autumn of 2019, Phillips coordinated with the Georgia authorities to execute a quiet warrant. She wanted the arrest conducted without incident, no media, no warning. On a cool November morning, agents approached Dillard outside his trailer as he left for work. He appeared calm, even detached, as they read him his rights. When asked if he knew why he was being arrested, Dillard said nothing. In custody, he maintained the same composure. His fingerprints were taken, his DNA recollected, and the laboratory confirmed the match within 48 hours. The probability of error was less than 1 in 10 billion. Phillips attended the interrogation. She sat across from him in the small windowless room. Dillard stared at the table, silent. When investigators presented the forensic evidence, his face showed no reaction. He neither confessed nor denied. Instead, he said in a quiet voice, "I worked there." That is all. There was no direct confession, but Phillips did not need one. The DNA, the timeline, the uniform fibers, and the vehicle log formed a complete chain, one strong enough to secure an indictment. After 24 years, the name on the Maple Creek cold case file finally had a face. The same man who had once vanished without a trace was now in handcuffs, awaiting extradition to Alabama. As news of the arrest spread across Maple Creek, the town that had buried its fear for decades was about to relive every unanswered question and face the chilling truth of how close their killer had always been. The morning news broke quietly at first, a short segment on a regional station reporting that a suspect had been arrested in connection with the 1995 murder of nurse Emily Carter. Within hours, the story spread across Alabama. Headlines read, "Cold case solved after 24 years, arrest in Maple Creek murder." For most people in town, it was a name they had not spoken in years. Yet, as soon as they heard it, the memories returned. The posters, the river, the unanswered questions. Everything that had faded into the background was alive again. At the Henderson County Sheriff's Office, the announcement was met with silence, followed by a sense of disbelief. Officers who had been young recruits during the original investigation stood in the hallway, staring at the bulletin board where Emily's photograph was pinned once more. Beside it, a new image appeared, the mugshot of Raymond Dillard, age 54, pale and expressionless. Detective Nora Phillips arrived that morning from Montgomery to coordinate the transfer. After 2 decades, she was back where it began. The courthouse, the streets, even the hospital parking lot were unchanged in shape but heavier with time. She met with Sheriff Clay Dobson, who had been a rookie deputy in 1995. Together, they walked through the evidence one last time before the press conference. When Phillips stepped before the microphones, her tone was calm and measured. "This case reminds us," she said, "that time does not erase truth. It only waits for it to be found." She refused to use Dillard's name, choosing instead to focus on Emily Carter, the victim whose story had endured through silence. Back in Maple Creek, Lydia Carter watched the announcement from her living room in Montgomery. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap. For years she had imagined this moment, but the reality felt surreal, a quiet kind of justice wrapped in exhaustion. She later told a reporter, "It was like hearing Emily breathe again after so long." Public reaction was divided between relief and disbelief. Some residents expressed gratitude that justice had finally arrived. Others found it difficult to accept that a man who had lived among them, fixing pipes and changing motel lights, had committed such a crime. At the diner where Emily used to stop for coffee, customers spoke softly, avoiding eye contact, as if saying too much might disturb something sacred. The prosecution of Raymond Dillard began with formal charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping and unlawful disposal of a body. The case was built entirely on physical and circumstantial evidence. No confession, no eyewitness, only science and persistence. The DNA results were unchallengeable, and the corroborating fibers, vehicle logs, and motel records formed a precise narrative. During pre-trial hearings, Dillard remained impassive. He spoke little, offering only short answers to procedural questions. His defense attempted to argue contamination of evidence, but the court found the preservation chain intact. The fact that the sample had been stored and sealed by Detective Green, a respected officer, carried significant weight. When the trial opened in early 2021, media crews gathered outside the courthouse. The pandemic had delayed proceedings, but the story's gravity drew attention across the region. Inside, the jury listened as prosecutors described the timeline, the shift ending at 11:47 p.m., the vehicle leaving the motel lot, the struggle near the car, and the fingerprints of history that had waited almost a quarter century to be identified. Lydia Carter attended each day of testimony. She sat quietly behind the prosecution table, her expression unreadable. She did not seek sympathy. She only wanted truth. When forensic experts described how Emily's DNA had been recovered and preserved, Lydia closed her eyes. The sound of those words, skin cells, fiber evidence, mitochondrial match, became the language of long-delayed justice. In her closing argument, the prosecutor said, "This case is not about what time has taken away. It is about what time could not destroy. The evidence, the memory, and the determination of those who refused to forget." After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Raymond Dillard was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the decision was read, no visible reaction when led away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, the air was heavy with quiet relief. Reporters surrounded Lydia as she left the building, but she declined to speak. Instead, she placed a single white flower on the courthouse steps before walking away. Detective Nora Phillips stood nearby watching. The case that had defined her career and haunted her for nearly half her life was finally closed. Yet closure was not the right word. Justice had been served, but peace was something different. Back in Maple Creek, the townspeople gathered for a small candlelight vigil near the Blackwater River. The event was unpublicized, attended mostly by hospital staff, former classmates, and neighbors who still remembered the young nurse who had vanished one October night. There were no speeches, only the soft sound of the river flowing past the bridge. As the candles flickered against the dark water, it seemed as though the silence that had haunted Maple Creek for 24 years had finally lifted, replaced by something quieter but lighter. That night, as Detective Phillips prepared to leave town for the last time, she stopped by the bridge where Emily had been found. There, beneath the sound of the current, she noticed a weathered cross, the same one placed decades earlier, now leaning slightly with age. It was not just a reminder of loss, but of what persistence could reclaim from the dark. The river moved the same way it always had, steady, cold, unhurried. In Maple Creek, seasons changed, buildings aged and faces grew older, but the water beneath the bridge where Emily Carter had been found never changed. It had seen everything, the fear, the searchlights, the silence, and now the quiet return of truth. Detective Nora Phillips stood at the edge of that water a few days after the sentencing. She was alone. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no ceremony. Only the rustling of leaves and the sound of wind against the guardrail. She looked down at the current and thought of Samuel Green, the retired detective who had refused to throw away a single piece of evidence. It was his patience that had preserved the clue everyone else had forgotten. Without that envelope, the case would have remained a story without an ending. Time had been both the enemy and the ally of this investigation. It had buried leads, faded memories, and erased witnesses, but it had also carried science forward, creating the very tools that brought justice back to life. What time took away, it eventually returned. Phillips reflected on the years in between, the families who had waited, the detectives who had moved on, the countless boxes of evidence still sitting in storage rooms across the state. She knew Emily Carter's story was only one among thousands. Most would never find resolution. But this one had. And it mattered. In Maple Creek, life slowly found rhythm again. The hospital built a small memorial garden behind its main building, dedicating it to victims of unsolved crimes. A plaque with Emily's name was placed beneath a flowering dogwood tree, simple, unadorned, and calm, much like she had been in life. Nurses passed it every morning on their way to shift change. Some paused briefly before heading inside. Lydia Carter returned once quietly to attend the dedication. She did not speak publicly or stay long. She laid a folded note beneath the plaque, then walked away as the breeze carried blossoms across the grass. Later, when the groundskeeper found the paper, it contained only 3 words: "You are home." Across town, the old Maple Creek Motel was gone. It had been torn down years earlier, replaced by a chain restaurant. Few people remembered who had once worked there. To anyone passing by, it was just another roadside stop, another parking lot under harsh white lights. Yet for those who remembered 1995, the ground beneath it still felt different, heavy with memory. Phillips later retired from the bureau. Her final assignment before leaving was to oversee the digitization of cold case evidence throughout Alabama. She made sure Emily Carter's case file was scanned and preserved in full, photographs, reports, and even Green's handwritten notes. She insisted that the label on the file read, "Closed, solved by persistence." When asked by a young detective what lesson the Carter case had taught her, Phillips replied simply, "Never underestimate what time remembers." Years later, people in Maple Creek still speak of the case in low voices, not with fear but with reverence. It became a reminder that justice, though slow, is rarely silent forever. The story found its way into classrooms, into local history books, and into quiet conversations between those who had lived through the uncertainty. Emily Carter's life did not end the night she vanished. It continued through the persistence of a retired detective, the resolve of a sister, and the evolution of science that refused to let the truth remain buried. As dusk settled over the town, the river glimmered beneath the fading light. The water no longer carried whispers of mystery, only the memory of a young woman whose story had once frozen an entire community in fear. Now, Maple Creek moved forward, not forgetting, but finally at peace. The truth had taken 24 years to surface, but when it did, it spoke for all the voices lost in silence. In the end, time itself had become the witness that never stopped listening. Years after the trial, the story of Emily Carter was no longer a headline. It was a legacy. Maple Creek, once known only as the town haunted by an unsolved murder, had become a symbol of endurance and quiet justice. What began as tragedy had evolved into something lasting, something that reached beyond the borders of Alabama. In 2023, the Alabama State Bureau of Investigation launched a statewide cold case re-examination initiative. Inspired directly by the success of the Carter investigation, the program's foundation was simple. Every file, no matter how old or incomplete, would be reopened if even a fragment of evidence remained. Inside the Bureau's training academy, a lecture series was introduced for new detectives, titled The Maple Creek Principle. It taught that patience, preservation, and faith in progress could resurrect the truth from decades of silence. Detective Nora Phillips became its first guest instructor. She stood before a room of recruits, her hair now gray, her voice steady, as she projected Emily Carter's photograph on the screen. This case, she said, was not solved by luck. It was solved because someone cared enough not to give up. Because one man kept an envelope safe when the world had already moved on. Her audience listened in stillness. The story had become part of institutional memory, proof that the smallest act of diligence could one day rewrite history. Meanwhile, in Maple Creek, Lydia Carter quietly funded a scholarship for nursing students at Henderson County Hospital. Each year, one student received it in Emily's name. The award letter carried a short message, for compassion that endures beyond time. Most recipients never knew the full story, but the name Emily Carter lingered in the halls like a soft echo, reminding everyone why the profession mattered. The house Emily once shared with Lydia was eventually sold. The new owners renovated it, painting the walls white and planting fresh azaleas along the fence. Yet sometimes, during autumn nights, neighbors said they still saw a small candle glowing in the kitchen window, a local tradition kept alive by those who remembered. The case also changed how Maple Creek saw itself. The town had once been defined by fear, but now it carried quiet pride. The annual community fair added a memorial segment honoring unsolved and solved cases alike. Not as spectacle, but as remembrance. Families brought photographs, shared updates, and reminded each other that persistence could still matter. Reporters occasionally revisited the story for anniversary features. They focused not on the horror of Emily's death, but on the perseverance that followed it. One national article called it a rare story of justice that refused to decay. For Lydia, reading such words brought no satisfaction, only a sense of stillness, the acceptance that closure was not an ending, but a continuation of memory. Phillips kept in touch with her. Every year on October 12th, they exchanged a single message still remembered. It was never more than that, but it was enough. When Phillips retired completely and moved to coastal Alabama, she donated her case notes and recordings to the state archive. Among the papers was a short reflection written in her own hand. Justice is not measured by speed or applause. It is measured by endurance, by the quiet decision to keep a promise to the dead. That reflection was later engraved onto a plaque in the Bureau's Cold Case Division. Beneath it, Emily Carter's name appeared once more, not as a victim, but as a reminder. The Maple Creek case changed lives, reformed procedures, and revived faith in evidence that time had nearly erased. More importantly, it proved that truth, once buried, could still find light, if someone was willing to wait long enough. On the anniversary of the verdict, a light breeze moved across the Blackwater River. The water shimmered under a pale sky, carrying reflections of trees, bridges, and the faint memory of what had once been lost there. Maple Creek had grown, changed, and healed. Yet beneath all the new layers of life, the echo remained, not of tragedy but of endurance. Emily Carter's story ended where it began, beside a quiet Alabama river. But what she left behind ensured that no silence, no matter how long, would ever be mistaken for peace again.